So today I want to talk about something that I haven't seen a whole lot of discussions around the community on, even when it initially was revealed some years ago. Something that's actually pretty important once we get into the finer details and implications of what it could mean. For those of you new around here, which, by the way, every single one of you, new or old, I love and appreciate every single one of your faces. Truly, thanks for sticking around. But back on topic though, even though I haven't really been doing it recently, you look back at my track record and you see a whole lot of videos talking about or discussing specifically the Union Cross timeline of the series, which, by the way, again, I use the term Union Cross for the entirety of the Key Saga, even though, yes, technically Union Cross is specifically in reference to what comes after the Keyblade War. It just makes it a lot easier to process and understand. Keeps us all on the same page. Regardless, this sequence of events is by far the most fascinating and intriguing timeline out of everything even Xehanort has thrown at us. And there is one instance specifically that not only hinted at Sora's defiance of fate in Kingdom Hearts 3, but also shows us exactly where the Foretellers went wrong, and why there is even light in the future to begin with, even after their tremendous fuck up. Except for you, Ava. We stan Ava in these parts. Actually was the Union I picked when playing the mobile game. Volpe's gang rise up. After the Keyblade War had ended and the dust has settled, we see Ephemer as well as Skuld arrive back to the scene of the crime in the Keyblade graveyard. It is here that we then transition into the events of Union Cross, and throughout multiple updates, one by one, we see a collective group of individuals handpicked specifically by the Master for Ava to gather to lead the new Dandelions into the future. Those being, of course, Brain, Ventus, Laurium, and as I mentioned earlier, Skuld and Ephemer. Together they would be dubbed the new Union leaders, Keyblade wielders that outside of everyone else in the new world would not have their memories altered or tampered with, remembering everything that had transpired, the Foretellers, the Unions, the Keyblade War, all of it. However, even though they were dubbed the Union leaders, they were everything but. And what exactly do I mean by that? Well, if you're asking that question, that exactly is what I mean by this moment being completely overlooked, or at the very least, lost among all the chaos that is Kingdom Hearts lore. So allow me to lead you down this path. Go ahead, take my hand. It's not that scary. I promise. After the Union leaders gather, their first course of action is to gather in the room where the Master and Masters originally resided. Brain immediately begins looking throughout notes and books that the Masters have left behind, telling Skuld that it's theirs now, so they should be able to do what they please. Way to go, Brain. Immediately taking the initiative, which again, he is one of, if not the biggest player into why the Union leaders even escaped to begin with. However, I've talked your ear off about that more than enough times by now. Back to the Union leaders, when they try to figure out what to do, Skuld suggests that they should all assign each other their own union to lead. Immediately, Ephemer disagrees, saying that he doesn't think that that's something that we should be doing right now. Brain and Laurium seem to mimic this thought as well, going on to explain that the union should be kept as they are, one big group, not pledging loyalty to one or the other. Of course, as Skuld mentions, to avoid repeating history. Almost immediately here we see the stark difference between those of the Foretellers and the Union leaders. During the Keyblade War, one of the biggest proprietors of the wielders turning on each other was their allegiance to their union, accusing one another of hogging all of the Lux for themselves, as stated in the passage that people fought over the light, as we've heard multiple times. The first instance being from Kairi's grandmother in Kingdom Hearts 1. Even in this scene, when we see Skuld interfere to stop this conflict, the first words out of this wielder's mouth is, "What union are you from?" When realistically, that doesn't even matter. But it is this next part that is the main reason I'm making this video, and the main reason why Ephemer and the Union leaders were able to defy destiny, and that is the rule book. As Brain mentions, the rule book states that they are to assign union leaders and in turn separate the unions just as before. However, Laurium finds a loophole by stating that yes, it does say that, but it doesn't specifically say when we have to do that. Now, I want you to keep this all in the back of your mind as we fast forward to the next instance of the union leaders gathering for a discussion, where all but Laurium arrive as Ephemer has something he wants to discuss with them. Again, before the conversation even takes place, when asking where Laurium is, Brain says that Ephemer has his full support, no matter what he decides, even making the joke of him being Mr. Leader, where Ephemer again responds by saying, "No, we are all leaders." Again, we see the difference between the Union leaders and their predecessors, the Foretellers, because of course, Ira was specifically deemed the leader of all of them. them, which of course would cause conflict down the road when it comes to trusting one another. Of course, it being his role, and of course being a seed that the master had planted in doing so. Already we are beginning to see the stark difference in mindset between these two groups who essentially function for the same purpose of leading the world of Keyblade wielders. Getting back to the topic Ephemer wanted to bring up, he mentions a passage in the rulebook that is called Shift Pride, a passage that states that the wielders are to engage in combat with one another. Even though it is just a friendly competition, Ven immediately speaks up that this isn't right. The idea of wielders fighting one another is not something that he can get behind. Scold as well. Ephemer then decides that they should follow the book, however, again finding another loophole in having the Keyblade wielders fight each other's data that was recreated with the data worlds after the war, instead of actually hurting one another. Again, we see another instance in which the book given to them specifically dictates the moves that they should make, and they instead do what their heart feels is right. Sound familiar?
May your heart be your guiding key. I say it all the time. You ultimately need to do what your heart feels is right.
Right.
Speaking of, what if I were to tell you that this entire time, even during the Key Saga when the Foretellers were in charge, was actually a test set in place by the Master of Masters? What if I were to tell you that the Masters gave the Foretellers their roles in hopes that they would actually deviate from them, and that the Union leaders had passed where the Foretellers before them had failed? Again, look at the parallels between these two groups of leaders, and specifically when it comes to Shift Pride in the way to carry out the plan in their leadership positions. The Foretellers were given a book of prophecies by the Master that dictated the future, and through this, essentially told the Foretellers what they had to do. Even telling Ira that you can't change the events that are going to happen, so just do as you're told, which is to follow their roles, which in turn initiates the Keyblade wielders fighting each other, and again leads to the Keyblade War. An exact parallel of the Union leaders who were also given a book by their Master, aka Ava, and in a way the Master of Masters as well, since he was overseeing her doing so, a book that, just like the Book of Prophecies, acted as a guide that was to dictate what the Union leaders were to do. Again, initiating Shift Pride, which again would lead to Keyblade wielders fighting one another, and as I just stated 10 seconds ago, would inevitably lead to another what? Another Keyblade War. Both groups were given specific instructions not to deviate from. Both groups were being tested by the Master of Masters. May your heart be your guiding key is prime evidence of that. This would explain why the Master was severely hands-off during the events of Key Back Cover. He wanted to see what decisions the Foretellers would make and if they would actually follow their hearts, which of course they inevitably would not. Whereas the Union leaders, at every instance of the book telling them to do something that they felt was wrong, would follow what their hearts were telling them to do. This is again echoed in their mindsets. Again, when we see the Union leaders gathering, Brain shows up and immediately looks to Ephemer as the leader. However, we see him immediately deny this, going back to the sentiment of how they are all in this together. There is no era, so to speak. We are equals. Of course, the parallels between the Foretellers and the Union leaders and the differences in how they approach the world continues on even further. During this same scene, Brain immediately asks about the rulebook and if they are set in stone or more of a guideline, immediately going against what he was told to do, different than the Foretellers. And again, why Ava chose him to be a part of the Union leaders. He does what Ava didn't have the strength or even the courage to do, the strength to question, to go against their master's teachings. Brain again asks seriously, how can we trust Master Ava? She told us to literally lie to everyone since we're the only ones who know the truth. And it is with this question that we see all the Union leaders are showing doubts about their quote-unquote master's teachings in a way. The same way as the Foretellers showed reluctance and doubt to their master's teaching. However, again, the Foretellers, some more than others, I'm looking at you, Envy, without a second thought followed what the master told them to do without so much as batting an eye, and those that so much as asked questions were deemed traitorous. Again, Brain immediately began researching the world to gain the info that he needed so that he would be capable of questioning and to be able to think for himself, leading him to the conclusion that they didn't escape disaster and that they were still inevitably heading for the path of destruction, which again led him to take the initiative needed to prevent this. Again, going back to this all being a test by the Master of Masters. In the Book of Prophecies, it says, "On that land shall darkness prevail and light expire." But we were looking at this all wrong. Allow me to introduce a different perspective, because the Keyblade War wasn't a fight against any sort of form or being of darkness. It was, quote unquote, light against light. However, the decisions the Foretellers made, especially when Era revealed later on that their whole purpose in the war was to make sure that there were no survivors left. Everyone that participated in the Keyblade War was deemed by the Master of Masters to have been tainted by darkness, which is why the Dandelions were sent to flee to the outside world. Wielders who the Master and Ava deemed to be the sole protectors of light. Every wielder that was on that field has shown that they have darkness in their heart. They quite literally are willing to kill each other, which again, if you had so much as a minuscule amount of darkness, the Master wanted you gone, as Luciu has stated about his strong aversion to darkness. And what better way than to have the darkness eradicate itself? It's Ericus on a whole nother level. This, of course, would include the Foretellers. In fact, they were the ones who sealed all of those Keyblade wielders' fates. It was their choices that led to the Keyblade War. In the Master's eyes, they were the ones most tainted by darkness, which leads into them being chosen to be the new vessels for the True 13, and leads to the Master erasing them from existence, just as he does with all darkness. Again, on that land shall darkness prevail and light expire, and the Foretellers at the end of the war were the only ones left standing. False lights under the guise of being noble and righteous, making up every excuse and every reason in the book not to follow their hearts. The Master quite literally told them what they had to do, allow their hearts to be their guiding key. And they did not. Envy helping Era behind the other wielders' backs, snitching on them in every move that they made simply because the Master told her to, even though in her heart of hearts she knows it was wrong. Even Ava when refusing to help Gula summon Kingdom Hearts and followed the Master's words definitively, even when doubting. All of them justifying their actions at every turn, whenever they began to lose their sense of self. The Foretellers have failed him. They are tainted by darkness. And again, this is all sounding pretty familiar.
They believe what they want to believe, using hollow reasons as justification. They repeat this cycle, and their darkness grows.
So you're saying the weak feel the need to justify their actions to maintain a sense of self. Can't let that slide?
No, it's better they be ruled by darkness. People carry delusions of having power, but it's a lie. They are but sheep pretending to be wolves. Though I admit, I can understand why.
Oh, I've never heard that one before. A Keyblade wielder willing to side with the darkness? Why not just let them be until the darkness consumes them?
Because left alone, the world would fall to chaos. There needs to be order.
You sure about that? Why not just sit back and watch it play out? I suppose letting false light dictate the future might be a pretty lousy move. So, you can make a change. You have that power. What do you want for the world?
Power, eh?